San Diego, and the scene behind me is San Diego Harbor. This is Harbor Island with the downtown right behind, and the San Diego Yacht Club has an array of sailboats loading up our screen for beauty and pleasure and symmetry. We have two experts in big business and senior level expertise. Ron Cooper is a regular participant, regular meaning not irregular, but regular all the time on different topics having to do with workplace development and strength within the workplace. And currently, we're in a dialogue series, super interesting, about honesty and about trust and believability and psychological safety within the workplace environment and how important that is. And our show tomorrow will be on that topic as well. And if you'd like to come, I'll send you an invite. It's 8 a.m. California time. Hampton Dowling has been a speaker at our live meetings in the Washington, D.C. area, going back, I don't know, 10 or 12 years now. And these were on the DC Beltway, and attracting people from the IC, otherwise known as the intelligence community, as well as some of the think tanks, and of course some of the companies who are in the Beltway. He has also spoken at our meetings when I was active at inside the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., where we produce monthly meetings at the press club. And you participated in many of those. Thank you. I've learned so much and have grown mentally as a result of listening to Hampton Dowling speak about his views about preparedness and being smart about global business. And this show is going to be the epitome of that. I asked him to speak about his recent writings and involvement with a special subcommittee investigating how to solve the problems connected with big business industry needing rare minerals that are not currently available in enough quantity within the U.S. And there's a need for international trade. And part of that is business security and physical security, because this is high stakes. Hampton, I'm going to stop talking. Please do an intro here, and I'll have a coffee.
Well, I'd much rather today, a nice day in Northern Virginia, but I'd much rather be on Harbor Island. I can tell you that. No, you know, the the 2025 has probably been the most impactful year that I know of in terms of business, politics, and what we have coined to really call geopolitics today. Where we were 5 years ago, 6 years ago, is dramatically different than where we are today. It doesn't matter what continent you're on, it doesn't matter what market vertical you're in. Everything has been shocked, everything has changed in some way, and policy doesn't matter what level of government you may be talking about. It doesn't matter what country you're in, but policy always drives business. It drives everything that we know about in society. It drives legislation, it drives security, it drives business practices, it drives socioeconomic behavior. And policies that have originated out of Washington, D.C. over the past 12 months, again, whether it's national security policy, whether it's trade related, it doesn't matter whether it's energy related, all of these policies that are all linked together are all driving significant changes around the world with respect to trade, and what are the mechanisms which trade is conducted and supervised and managed. And it's completely changing relationships around the world. So when I say things have changed dramatically between maybe 5 or 6 years ago and where we are today, it's really evident in the direction of elections around the world, particularly in Latin America, and also how we view our trading partners, what they're willing to trade with us, their behavior with us, their political alliances with us. And all of this has something to do with the US-Chinese relations and the direction of capital and free markets in the world.
Ron, would you like to add?
Oh, I'm right on board with Hampton. In we are globally interdependent, and the United States has need for precious metals just as one source, some of which are in Greenland, some are in China, and some other places. But from my perspective, and I don't mind precious minerals, it seems we have need for more precious minerals than what we have access to in the United States, which makes us dependent on those countries that do have those precious minerals. And as Hampton very eloquently has stated, it's a matter of relations between countries. Can we get access to those precious minerals? And if the answer is no, then it's going to affect us and others globally, economically. And might we have to shift how we manufacture products to where we have less dependency on those precious minerals? But that's just some of the very top level considerations.
So I'm going to say a couple of things. It's not political. It's everything to do with business with me. However, President Trump is a theatrical guy. And all of this Western Hemisphere stuff with Venezuela and Greenland, I know I just instinctively know because I'm a Gemini and I know that that guy's a Gemini too. And he's setting us up for something, or he's setting up NATO for something. And maybe that's what's going on behind the scenes now. Because there must be a reason for all the excitement about buying Greenland when we already have a long-term security agreement and access. So the idea, though, if the ice continues to melt and the ocean opens up, the U.S. has to protect itself, has to even protect Canada, whether we want to or not, because that is, well, open. It will become more open than ever before relative to the insecurity of the radar that's up there and the oil and other minerals, and notwithstanding what is in the ground in Greenland, about which I know practically nothing. Hampton, can you enlighten us? Certainly that is tied in with the Panama Canal strength as well. I get that.
Well, I mean, everything's really connected. In the mid to late 50s, we saw the same opening of the Arctic waterways. And it's all cyclical, it's weather, it's all rather predictable. And what we're seeing in the Arctic Circle with the Arctic trade lanes has been predicted for about 15 years. Ship construction, icebreaker construction was all tied to this. And so has the maneuvering of Russia and China, which has the greatest interest in the Arctic sea lanes. And so what we're seeing happening up there is not really a surprise. President Trump raised this issue of the Arctic sea lanes and accessing Greenland and protecting Greenland and having a more refined, robust defense of Canada during his first administration. But I mean, candidly, he was very distracted during that administration. He couldn't really focus on everything that he is now. But I think, as you mentioned, he's rather theatrical. And if you listen to what he says, he always makes a comment. And there are people out there that just focus on this. He makes comments that if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it. But he's often teeing up something that he's going to be focused on later, sort of like it's a cue. It's a prequel to something you need to be paying attention to. And Greenland is certainly one of them. And yeah, we have access to Greenland. We have a military base there. I mean, we have a lot of agreements that are standing. But, the idea is that we need to really pay attention to it and protect it, because China and Russia have already made advances on the territory of Greenland. They've already been violated airspace, land space. They have plans. And so looking ahead 10 or 15 years, that's really what the focus is. But it is tied to critical minerals. And putting that Greenland topic aside for a minute, 70% of the most critical minerals for strategic industry across the globe have been either sourced by China, managed by China, or the supply chains are managed by China. And that creates tremendous vulnerability globally, not only for national security, but it controls inflation levers in many countries. It controls domestic productivity across the world, regardless of country. So Greenland's amount of natural resources is tied to U.S. policy that's focused on accessing and sourcing guaranteed critical minerals. So all of this is rather connected, and opening the transit lanes of the Arctic has a bearing on the throughput of container ships and cargo going through the Suez Canal as well as the Panama Canal. So, business is interested in this, maritime administration is interested in this, geopolitics, governance, environmental management. So it's not an accident by any means that the first visit by the Secretary of State of the U.S. was not to China, it wasn't to Russia, it wasn't to Britain, it wasn't Japan. It was to Panama. First visit by the Secretary of Commerce. First visit by the Secretary of War. A signal to everybody that the president is focused on trade, free trade, and commerce. And that was a signal to how he was going to view the Arctic trade lanes, how he's viewing the sea lanes going to the Suez Canal. If it has a bearing on the U.S. economy, he's going to pay attention to that. And through business agreements, trade deals, tariff administration, he's creating an architecture that puts America in a place where the sourcing of critical minerals and rare earth elements is uninterruptible. And in the process, in theory, but I think is coming out in practice, actually benefits our trade partners, sometimes through tough love, but in the end, it's paying off dividends that are mutually acceptable.
Ron?
And once again, I'm in very much agreement. Many people don't like President Trump's personality. You mentioned theatrics. Personally, I think I use just a slightly different term. I think he's a long-range strategic thinker. In the context of the Panama Canal, Suez Canal, Arctic passageways, national security, I view President Trump as thinking about these things. He's thinking long term. What will be the economic cost if the Panama Canal is shut down and we can't use that, Suez Canal, and so forth? What if we cannot get access to the precious minerals from China? China's economy, from what I have read, and I've not been in China, is faltering. He, I think, is looking at all of this tariffs, a very open topic. And people may or may not agree with his policy regarding tariffs. And certainly his personality, that some people call him a fascist and so forth. But I think with Donald Trump, he has a very definite plan in mind. You may not agree with the means to the end, but I think that he is thinking globally, long term. And to me, that's his credit. Now, he is divisive in going about some of his tactics, which some people may categorize as theatrical, but at least he's thinking about, and unfortunately, in the context of, he can be very divisive with his theatrics. And so, at any rate, that's somewhat of a long answer, but President Trump, again, I think to his credit, is a long-term thinker and thinking about the economic impact of the United States, and I certainly agree with Hampton. The way we're going about matters globally right now is very different from the way we did 5 years ago.
So it's exciting, and I think it's dangerous. The stakes are high, so it's dangerous, and it seems like all hands are on deck and ready. You can see what's going on off of Venezuela, but also in the topic of Cuba, uh, the uh, the fact that China has already been uh, very active in Latin America, in Chile with a big seaport, and what's that all about? Is it
Well, Ed,
just
I think, you could say it's high risk, but I, I, I think the results of a number of interlocking events started during his administration, uh, observing the changes and the behavior and the policies of the Biden administration and what the president has done, President Trump has done in the past 12 months. Let's kind of look at Latin America. You have 5 or 7 presidential elections scheduled this calendar year. 2 of them are, it depends on their constitution and some certain situations. But of those 5 to 7, all but one are all going to be won by conservative presidents. You can go online and you can look at it. The prediction is very clear. Well, that's a radical change from what it was viewed a few years ago. Bolivia, I mean, a lot of people don't even know where Bolivia is, but Bolivia is probably the most communist country in Latin America, very tied to Cuba and Russia. That's failing. And the conservative candidate is predicted to win by almost 30 points. That's enormous. So, and you've seen president of Argentina completely, I mean, is very pro-Trump. First president to visit President Trump right after the election was the president of Argentina. In fact, he's even embraced the Doge concept. I mean, he's really rapidly turning Argentina around to be the leading economy in Latin America. Huge. I mean, everybody's going to Argentina right now. So what are we seeing going on in Brazil? You have a president who is widely recognized, rigged his own election and became president. And now the population is really almost 70% conservative. And going in their election at the end of the year is a potential real defeat for China, because China's invested a lot of time and political capital in Brazil. You look at what's happened in Venezuela. Venezuela, unpredicted, unknown to everybody. You've removed the president who was really the cornerstone of setting up socialist agenda across Latin America with Cuba after the Berlin Wall fell in 1990. It's called the Sao Paulo Forum. And he influenced 11 to 12 governments in Latin America to be socialist. Well, now at the end of 2026, it's predicted that only one government will be socialist in Latin America, most of which will turn during this year. I mean, that's an enormous pivot. And you have Venezuela, which has now had the upheaval that it's had. We have ongoing agreements being made with U.S. energy companies to invest and thrive and develop in Venezuela. So what does that do? Well, it sets an example for the rest of Latin America of what the private enterprise can do if it's allowed to thrive. And Venezuela has enormous natural resources. And China was very dependent upon having that relationship stay in place. Now it's completely dissolved. And so you're going to have quality of life change in Venezuela. You're going to have an alternative oil supply going into the U.S. and our allies. And you're going to have a lot of other natural resources going into the United States. Panama, yes, I mean, I'm associated with a magazine that's published in Panama, Maritime Magazine, and there was a real shaking of the boots in Panama when President Trump took such an interest in Panama and the canal. The threat to resume ownership and control of the canal in accordance with our treaty was very real and very understood by everybody. Chinese presence in the canal and influence was pervasive. And so now you have an agreement by the agreement of the company that's running the canal has been ruled unconstitutional. It's being renegotiated to ensure there are U.S. equities in play. We now have U.S. troops in Panama going through training, jungle training. We're training Panamanian troops, Panamanian police, much like it used to be. So you're seeing, results have consequences, and changing the governments to be pro-West, pro-capital, pro-Trump, those policies change economics. They influence trade agreements, and they allow us ultimately to forge agreements that include the guaranteed sourcing of critical minerals to U.S. strategic industry. So one thing that's done leads to another thing that leads to another thing, which ultimately, as an example we talked about earlier, leads to this critical minerals agreement that includes not only Europe, not only Canada, not only Japan and Australia, but countries in Latin America, to include Mexico. I mean, we've all witnessed the back and forth between the president of Mexico and President Trump. But in the background, unknown to most people, was an alliance dealing with critical minerals. Because in the end, these leaders understand business. And business cannot be successful unless you have the right policies. And the right policies have not been in place for an extended period of time. And the people are recognizing that, because you're now going to see probably 7 presidential elections in Latin America, 6 of which will be conservative.
Yeah, that's really an amazing turnaround. I've been reading on Latin America, particularly Argentina recently, and I've never been there, but I certainly would like to go there while I still can. The first Latin America meeting, live meeting I produced was in 06 in Panama, and it was at the Marriott, which is near. And my host partner there is still in business, and he operates a transportation company in the canal. And I'll be glad to talk about that privately with you later. He's a good guy. And the family at the time also had members in the government, and they came and spoke about the pending approval to expand the canal back then. All right. And it won. And also in the audience were several corporate people who were based, mostly U.S. companies with a Panama office or Brazil or Mexico office, Costa Rica also. From that event that went very well, there was a snowstorm along the East Coast, Northeast, and our meeting got extended by 2 days because people couldn't go home. The snowstorm was so big that everybody just stayed in the hotel and the party went on. But one of the partiers and the guy in the room was in charge of, at the time, PricewaterhouseCoopers Latin America, based in Sao Paulo. And he enjoyed the meeting and then pulled me aside and says, "Come to Brazil, I'll host your meeting." So we then produced 7 meetings across the next 10 years that Pricewaterhouse basically paid for.
That's great.
Yeah, it was really good. And that got me into the community there. One of the best meetings was in downtown Rio, inside the Coca-Cola building, the tall building had the big Coke sign on it overlooking Sugarloaf. So that was the headquarters in Latin America for Ernst and Young. And so they hosted me in that space there in Rio. And PwC had meetings with me in Sao Paulo, and then also in Rio down, I forget the name of the beach, but just beyond Ipanema and that other beach down there.
You need to go back, Ed.
Yeah, I know. We should go. Anyway, that was quite a time. And so to this day now, I still have some relations there. And that's why I'm doing these Zoom broadcasts occasionally. And I'll keep you posted because I'd love you to come back. So where do we go from here? Is Cuba in the president's sights now?
I don't know, Ron, do you have any thoughts on that? Or?
I believe so. Cuba is, from what I'm reading, and I've not been there, is having economic challenges as well as China and so forth. And Hampton, you alluded to what I perceive to be some people who think that the socialist trends are the way to go, but now the swing is back to conservative policy. That is less government. I do believe that some people, it seems, need to experience socialism to whatever degree they will, and they will see that, from my perspective, it's not long-term sustainable globally for trade. But I do believe, again, that some people see these trends and I do believe it's the conservative policies, and I'm a conservative in the context of I want entrepreneurs to help be the large part of developing countries economically. I want the government to ensure my safety as a business owner, but beyond that, I don't want the government to control my business and how I choose to conduct it. But I think a lot of people globally are seeing that these conservative policies are longer term sustainable than the socialist policies. That is my perspective. And Hampton, you may have a different view of the reason of the conservative swing back to conservatism.
Well, Venezuela, again, President Trump, as you said, he's a strategic thinker, and his actions initially with Panama, it was tactically and strategically necessary for him to be there through the Secretary of State, Commerce and War. But then at the same time, he's pivoting in the background with Venezuela. Nobody's really looking at it, and removing the president of Venezuela for narco-terrorism reasons was huge, because China has been very much part of the cartel movement of drugs going into the United States, paid for and funneled by Venezuela. But Venezuela was also pushing a lot of the same drugs into Europe, and European leaders were very well aware of that. So
now, were they doing that to weaken the governments in place, or to push the drugs, killing?
Pushing drugs, and in any continent has a multiple objectives. But in the case of Venezuela, it was just a very corrupt government. Well, no, everybody knows that. But everybody also realized that the natural resources were not being properly optimized. I mean, the wealth of the country was just staying in the dirt. And what activity was ongoing was corrupt. People see that. Their quality of life wasn't rising. And the internet, the information is available. And they see, things are better in other places. But the president took action against Venezuela. Well, what country is almost entirely dependent upon Venezuela? Cuba. All of Cuba's energy comes from oil coming from Venezuela. Well, that was cut off. President Trump cut off the flow of oil and natural gas going to Cuba. Yesterday, just coincidentally, since we're talking about it, Cuba announced that they were not going to they could not guarantee the availability of aviation fuel to commercial airlines going into Havana. So now you see airlines having to stop their change their routing and their schedules. So you're seeing gradually and gradually and gradually, Cuba will ultimately probably implode during this calendar year. So again, going back to what I said before, you have 5 to 7 presidential elections going on in Latin America. Honduras is probably the only one that will survive. The others will turn conservative. I have Venezuela, which is going to go through probably a required election because the president's been removed, the vice president's in place. They're going to need a national election. I think it's very predictable about how that election will turn out. It's going to be a pro-West, pro-trade, pro-free market president in Venezuela. Well, in Cuba, 90 miles from Key West, you're going to see the collapse of Castro's socialist regime. And so what does that mean? Well, it's going to be influenced by Florida, and those elections will turn. So what, generally speaking, and that will influence the rest of the Caribbean, of which has recently been the benefactor of an enormous investment by China. So the chessboard across Latin America is changing in real time, and we see that this calendar year. So if the three of us get together in early February of next year, I wonder how different the conversation will be if we go back and remember what we talked about today about predicting the results of not only elections, but activities in Venezuela and the domino cascading effect going into Cuba.
And I'll interject here, Hampton, that I think if I could have been in the planning room with President Trump, he knows, I believe, that economic sanctions will have the longest term effect on various nations without having to go to war with. Iran, yep, just a very quick strike there, affect them economically. Venezuela, how can we have a very lasting impact with Venezuela? Leave it up to the military, Delta Force. Within 6 hours, we're going to achieve the objective, get Maduro out. The oil, this is a longer term economic factor. How can we affect Cuba and others and have an ultimate long-term positive impact? Well, we're going to affect the oil, but we don't want a long-term war with Venezuela. How do we make that happen?
Right.
Yeah, let the military intervene, and yep, a one-time, very surgically implemented strike. Maduro is out, and then nothing more happens. Some people are worried about going to war with. Well, no, there's a way that we can surgically intervene and not get into a protracted situation. And I just think that is how Donald Trump thinks. And I would have loved to have been in the planning room to just hear how the discussion evolved on that.
Well, it's changed the landscape in Latin America, and the second largest spoken language in the United States is Spanish. And what are the roots of southwest part of the United States? And now you see also the results of large migration going into the U.S. And don't underestimate there are other influencing factors besides trade. We have the influence of AI and the evolution of industry. Well, Latin America is not in a position to optimize and leverage these advances in technology and manufacturing. And a lot of that has to do with the governance and the policies that these countries had to live with for 15 plus years. And businessmen recognize that in Latin America. So does the general population. This transformation of AI is influencing the way people view their future in Latin America, and they're going to express those concerns in the voting booth. And then, of course, we have the demographics. You had a large number of people leaving Latin America and going into the United States. The revised estimate of illegal immigration over the past 4 years is now pushing 40 million. That's a lot of people. It's an enormous amount of people. the majority of which have come from Central and South America. Well, every year, it's been estimated, I think, that it was about 70 or $75 billion has been cash has been repatriated from immigrants in the U.S. back to their homes in Latin America. Well, one, we don't need that in the United States. We need that kind of money to stay here. But these Latin American governments realize that they can't be dependent on that cash flow. In other words, sending Latin American people illegally into the United States to send money back to their countries is not the way to run their country. And they are concerned about that. So you're seeing a number of realities coming into play at the same time that's going to affect elections. And elections will affect policy, and policy will affect trade, will affect private sector, and it affects the ability of private sector companies, whether they're Chinese, American, or European, to conduct business in Latin America. And I would suggest that the activity, the strategy that the United States is playing out in real time is designed to put America first in these relationships with Latin American countries and Latin American companies, but not exclusively. It will also help EU countries and those from Southeast Asia because it creates a free trade environment. It brings in Western business practices, and that is holistically different than the way Latin America has been allowed to play out over the last 15 years.
Yeah, go ahead.
We got about 5 minutes remaining. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the time, but I was going to say that I think Marco Rubio is the right person to work the matters in Venezuela. He's right there with the culture. He is adaptive too. He is, and in the context of AI, I just have to believe that yes, AI is further down the road, but we are thinking everything about the Venezuela or Latin American commerce to include AI, but at the moment it's oil, and it's a most immediate impact. AI is going to be affected later down the road, but Marco Rubio, yep, I know how to work with this culture. I know how to bring about the greater good long term. Ed Hampton, those are my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Ron. The trust issue that you've been championing on our programs and will continue again tomorrow morning. Marco Rubio is that image of American trust in the view of serious business people inside and throughout Latin America. It's a perfect Secretary of State.
Oh, I'm right there with you, and we must develop trust and respect with each between countries, and when that is developed, a lot of cooperation and confidence can happen because we're able to, and Ed, you and I have talked about it a bunch, but as long as we can communicate, if we have confidence in each other, we'll be able to work through any differences we have, and it may take a longer time to do so, but as long as we can communicate, we'll work through and we'll reach an amicable solution. That may seem to be a very grandiose comment, but that is a principle I believe in.
Well, China has fallen short on their promises with their agreements with Latin American countries.
Yep.
You know, they've made investments, they've made promises, and it hasn't come through. So, you know, part of this pivot are these governments, the people, looking for sources of trust to elevate their quality of life. Latin America countries don't want to simply be sources of commodities and service providers. They want to be part of the manufacturing world. They want to be part of R&D. They want to be part of innovation. And so they don't have access to that with current governance and relationships with China. So they see an imperfect path to a greater, better life through the opportunities that are currently being presented. Complicated, maybe it takes a change in government, but you know, that's society and it has to happen. So I'm very optimistic about what 2027 will mean for Latin America in comparison with the way it's been for an extended period of time.
Thank you
Right
very
on.
much, guys. Hampton, Ron, please come back and let's continue this on a
Not
more
going to happen, Ed. You're supposed to have these meetings in Brazil now and Panama. It's not going to happen unless you're down there.
Oh, I think my Joanne will agree with you 100%.
All right, we're all in agreement.
All right. Thank you for being on Global TV,
Thank
Global
you. Good seeing you, Ron.
Business TV Network. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.